Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books off the shelf, blow the dust off them, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. I'm Tom Galley. Joining me today, we've got Tony Pasculi.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
And today we're talking about one of my favorites, especially my favorite, one of my favorite novels, The Mote in God's Eye.
So excited to talk about this one.
Yeah, I first encountered this, I want to say early college. Might have been late high school, I don't know, but it has really stuck with me. Although, honestly, I've only read it a few times. This might have been my fourth pass through it, maybe.
Wow, okay.
Maybe the third. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed most of it. There were a couple of things in it that I remembered as I was reading. It's like, oh yeah, this annoyed me at the time. But I gotta say, whenever you start a novel and you open in the very first pages as a list of the cast of characters, it's a little intimidating.
I was put off by that for a couple of reasons. Like, one, I don't want to commit to learning this list. So if you can't distinguish your characters better than that, you're already in trouble. But two, the first chunk of the novel in particular feels to me less like a story and more like a construction kit. It's like, hey, let's assemble a vast array of characters and put them in an interesting environment and then never refer to them or use them again. It's like, there's a couple people who only get mentioned once or twice, so like they're important in the beginning.
This is true.
And it feels very much like someone did a lot of world building up front without regards to the storytelling. I
could see that, but we start with that, and then it's followed by a chronology, a future chronology, which is interesting. But again, a lot of that we could have puzzled out in context, and most of the names we could have puzzled out in context.
And again, a lot of that chronology doesn't pay off either. Some of it does.
You have references, a few references, yeah, but
the collapse of the First Empire is significant.
Yeah,
yeah,
because they measure themselves against the First Empire.
Exactly, and that's thematically important and important in their dealing with the Motes. But a lot of I can't even remember everything they said in that. It's just like, oh my God, this is too much to keep track of. I wonder if it's going to be even relevant.
Yeah, a lot of it I kind of paged out. Now, this is one of those rare cases where I think reading on a paper novel would have been superior to reading in the Kindle, because you could have thumb-eared, dog-eared the cast of characters. So when you're reading, it's like, and Bob said this, it's like, wait a minute, which one was Bob? Flip back to oh, right, Bob's that guy.
I don't know if you know this, the Kindle has improved their interface for thumbing through stuff. So you can now, if you, I forget what it is, how to get into this mode, but you can skim rapidly through the book to the beginning, or just say go to beginning, but it'll remember where you were. You can just pop back.
I'll have to look into that.
So that's something I use a lot. But I didn't bother with this book because I felt I didn't care. If I didn't remember who the character was, I did not care.
Well, and a lot of it becomes unimportant. There's only a handful of them that really matter at the end of the day. But yeah, I don't know. I really enjoy the first two-thirds, maybe the first three-quarters of this book just are riveting to me. And then it turns into a romance novel, at which point I lose a lot of interest.
It's weird. I didn't think it turned into a romance novel, but I thought, the beginning is, the first chunk of it is a little dry, I think. It's like we're just going through and we don't know what the story is yet. But as soon as we know what the story is and we're off to the Mote to investigate, it's a first contact novel, which is always exciting. I love first contact novels. But then you learn the terrible secret of the Motes, and then the people who learn that secret die. And then we spend the second half of the book learning it again. And I'm just like, and those scenes leading up to that moment are some of the most exciting scenes in the book. You've got their ship gets taken over. It's infested by a plague of watchmakers.
Watchmakers or brownies.
And they lose the ship and they have to evacuate everybody, and that's exciting. At the same time, some midshipmen launch their escape pods and they make it to the planet. And there's this whole sort of Capricorn 1 scenario where it's like, did they survive or didn't they? And we get their whole story, and they're the ones that learn the terrible secret. And then all of that exciting stuff gets followed up by a whole long, like as you say, a romantic subplot, and then a political subplot of treaties and meetings. And
the treaties and the meetings portion of it didn't bother me because that is viable, but they focused on the wrong parts of it. Yeah. And then again, the whole romance subplot, it added nothing to the book. I didn't care enough about the characters to care that they were romantically involved. And I didn't see that it built up to them being romantically involved. It's just at some point, either Niven or Pournelle decided, okay, and these guys are going to fall in love starting in chapter,
Oh, I actually found that very plausible because they were the only two people of the appropriate rank to be romantically involved. And there was this whole thing about duty because they're aristocrats.
Right.
The aristocracy
well,
is...
Now that was so much fun to me because you've got people, they've got aristocratic titles, they've got religious titles, and they've got military titles.
Yes.
You know, and there's even a plot early in the thing, you know, when Lord Blaine, Roderick, I wrote his name down, Roderick Harrell, who's becomes the captain of MacArthur. He gave his word to, you know, some outlier faction, you know, and his commanding admiral said, "Who did you give your word as? Was it as an officer of the Navy or was it your, you know, aristocratic word?" He's like, "It's my aristocratic word." He's like, okay, so that opens possibilities as to, you know, if he doesn't honor it, what are the consequences going to be versus what would they have been if it had been his military word?
Yeah.
Very feudal, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I found that interesting. I think the second half of the book is a lot of Pournelle's influence. I find that, so you were looking for a Niven book, you wanted to read a Niven book, and this is kind of almost the least Niven-y Niven book you could have picked, because there's so much of Pournelle in this. Niven writes really lean, spare, high concept, edgy, science-based fiction. And Pournelle is more, I don't want to say bloated, but certainly longer and much more heavily influenced by politics and military things.
Maybe Larry started at the beginning and then Pournelle started at the end and they met in the middle. I don't know.
I do feel like they told one part of the story twice, and the first part was the more interesting time.
Definitely. Well, you know, we're looking at the humans trying to puzzle out the Mote secret, whereas, you know, when we have the three midshipmen on the planet, they're kind of beat over the head with the Mote secret.
They get handed the secret, yes.
Now, there's a part in that sequence that bothers the bejesus out of me. And as I was reading it, I remembered it bothering the bejesus out of me back when I read it the first time and previous times through. And it has to deal with the midshipmen when they die. I've got it all highlighted in here. But we find out, you know, they get killed in an attack by the demons, right? They're stranded on the planet. They're running for their lives unsuccessfully. So one of them gets shot by a warrior caste. The second one stabs the third one through the neck with a sword because the third one's not allowed to commit suicide, and it's clear that they're about to get overrun. Yeah. And then he himself gets shot by a demon. So all three of them are casualties of either, you know, of hostile action. And yet there's a passage in here. I'm going to have to read it.
I don't know.
Okay, here we go. So this is just afterwards when they're all dead. And there was a moment earlier when Whitbread's Mote had, to get his attention, had grabbed him by the front of his shirt with her powerful left hand, not with the right hands. She was executed for disobedience, and she died alone. Her sisters did not hate her, but they could not bring themselves to speak to one who had killed her own, and I'm actually going to try to pronounce this, Fianch. Right. But at no point did she kill anybody, right? We were specifically told how each of the three midshipmen died.
Okay, I don't remember that passage. I thought that, and maybe it's because I remember the second passage that they had intervened to save them from, because they wanted to keep them alive, right?
They did want to keep them alive. The intention was to keep them alive, but it just didn't work out that way.
Yeah. So okay.
Yeah.
I did not notice that inconsistency.
So if I mean, and again, it's one of those little things that has, you know, whatever. I mean, they could have been upset because the fact that she grabbed him with her left hand, because they specifically do talk about her doing that, was forbidden. But no, they say she killed him, but she didn't kill anybody unless helping him to try to escape a lifetime of imprisonment somehow qualifies as killing him.
Yeah, maybe. So let's talk about the Motes, because they, you know, in spite of the fact that I have some issues with the book itself, I love these aliens. They're so interesting. They're such a, I mean, there's a lot about the human body that makes sense as something that would arise for intelligent life in other forms or in other places, you know, independent evolution. And yet the Motes are close enough to that it seems very plausible and different enough to be very, very interesting. And the big thing, of course, you mentioned is they have one very, very strong left hand and two much more intricate and delicate right hands. So they're asymmetrical. Only they don't have a spine. That's less interesting.
They don't have a spine.
They don't have a spine. They just have backbones, literal like femurs, just like two huge femurs in their back, so they can't bend or rotate or anything like that. And that's great. And then they have this, terrible secret, which is great, which drives the whole book and very, very effectively.
Yeah,
yeah.
No, they're a fascinating culture. I don't know actually culture is the right word, but I mean the fact that they have, through natural selection and through, their own intervention, developed this stratified caste system that is so hardwired into them they can't conceive of life everywhere not following the same model.
Yes.
Which is actually no different than humans, right? We're so convinced we've got the answers that this clash, and over such a little thing, which should be such a little thing, but in the future, where are we in the Second Empire, Third Empire, whatever the current empire is, everybody's prudes, right? We're prudish. We don't talk about sex. We don't talk about reproduction. So this one thing that is the Mote's terrible secret is already like ooh, I don't know if we should even talk about that.
It's off the table for discussion, so we can't learn about it.
Right.
Because we're blinding ourselves, yes.
Yeah. And they very adroitly lead the humans away from any attempts at that discussion. So, well, clearly, I mean, there's things we wouldn't talk about, and there's things they wouldn't talk about. But the idea that, as you get to the end, you've got the three ambassadors, and they realize humanity is going to kill us all if we don't come up with a solution here. Because if we get out, we're going to infest the galaxy, and the entire galaxy is going to be subject to these cycles. Yes. On a galaxy-wide scale, there's absolutely nothing that we can do to prevent it, and yet this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to be a plague on the galaxy.
I like that self-reflection on the part of at least one of the Motes that, I mean, there's a desperation to escape the confines of their home planet because they're condemned by these cycles. But then there's also that recognition that if they do escape, there'd be some temporary relief, but then they would be condemning a galaxy's worth of population to these cycles.
Yep.
That they're really inescapable. So that was thoughtful.
And the idea that a civilization could be so very, very old, and we never actually get an answer to how old, but it's old enough that there are no radioactive materials left anywhere in the solar system.
That's pretty old. It's at least 100,000 years, if not more, probably much more, because they've had evolution over the course of their civilization.
Yep, they have steered their own evolution, right? Yeah. I mean, they created, as horrific as it is, they created helpless Motes to be food. Yeah. A meat breed. Yeah, and the fact that when they try to identify with a human, because they've got that caste system so built into them, and the fact that humans don't work that way, it actually drove at least one of them, if not all of them, to some degree, completely bonkers.
Yes, yeah, they go insane.
They go insane. Maybe they just go crazy, Eddie, or maybe they go worse than that.
I did appreciate the sort of hard nose. I don't know if they name check Clausewitz, but they at least refer to his most famous quote, which is, "You don't prepare for what you think the enemy will do, but what they can do." So capability matters much more than intention, and that's I think that's a real concern. And the tension between the military is like, well, we want to play it safe, and then we're seeing no evidence of bad behavior or bad intention. And ultimately, a lot of the Motes were well-intentioned. And then as we learn, their intentions are irrelevant because they are not bound by intention. They are bound by biology.
Yep.
Yeah. So what they will do is different from what they want to do.
There's so much on the sciencey side that I like about this. I like the fact that we spend a decent amount of time with people strapped into acceleration chairs and starships boosting along at 4.5, maybe 5G. I love the fact that we've got the lovable, strong-willed, but idiotic woman who, determined to show that she can carry her own thing, stands up under high acceleration.
Just to show she can.
Just to show she can, and almost damages herself getting back down into the chair. And all these manly men are like, what the heck were you thinking? We would never do such a thing.
I like the naming of things. And this is something that's really hard to do in science fiction. It's like, oh, we're going to call it and I'm going to make up some word for some future technology. And then it's just like, that's this horrible thing that I have to deal with as a reader for the rest of the book. But like these warp points are called Alderson points because presumably some guy named Alderson discovered them.
The Alderson Drive, right?
Yeah, the Alderson Drive and the Alderson Point, or they call it the Crazy Eddie Point, which is fun also, taking the Mote's perspective on it. That's a really fun convention to just give very, very pronounceable human names to things, which is much how like we name things, and not having to invent some absurd technological name that's going to have to wrestle with.
One of my favorite names in this was Numb-It-All. They have a painkiller, and they call the painkiller Numb-It-All.
Yeah.
I thought that was just a fantastic. It's like, yep, I can totally see that as a marketing campaign.
You know who else does a fun job with that? I don't know if you've read Scalzi's Old Man's War series.
I think the only Scalzi I've read is Red Shirts.
Oh, okay. So they've got these genetically enhanced soldiers, and they develop technology, and then they brand it. So they replace their blood with a specially enhanced kind of blood, full of nanobots and has special properties, and it's called Smart Blood, capital S, capital B. And they give them a brain implant, which is called a Brain Pal, capital B, capital P. It's all branded technology. It's very fun. Yeah. So I have two highlights on this book, which are interesting, just because the lock on the museum, is keyed to a level of technology.
Yes.
So you can't get into this lock until you have discovered enough astronomy to be able to figure out this puzzle on the lock.
Yep. Yeah. But as Mote said, the museums are important.
Yes.
Right? Anything they can do to accelerate their technological development. And they're screwed. They don't have radioactives on the planet anymore. Yeah. They have to make the leap from fossil fuels to fusion power.
Yes.
There's no in-between step there.
It's kind of amazing they have fossil fuels left on the planet, actually.
I suppose to some degree you can burn cellulose, right? I mean, they could grow forests and burn them.
But that's much less energy dense.
Yeah, I don't think they have oil and coal lying around.
Yeah. And the other thing was, this was interesting. So I first read this book in high school, I think, because this is a game I used to play with my friends in high school, and I didn't know where I had come across it. And reading this book reminded me, I must have come from this book. They're talking about this Mote toy. It's a game of logic, no question about it. One player selects some rule to sort various objects into categories, and the other players attempt to deduce the rule and prove it. And so we used to do that. We just grab a handful of things, and then one person would come up with a rule in their head, and they would take half the pile and separate it into two piles. And then you'd use the remaining items, and you'd use those as guesses to go, I think this goes in this pile. And you go, no, it goes in that pile. And you try to figure out what the rule is. Yeah. And it could be things that are organic versus things that are inorganic, things which are shiny with things that are not shiny, things which are valuable and things which are not valuable, or whatever. Yeah. The rules could be arbitrary. And the more Baroque the rules get, the more fun the game is. Yeah. So we used to play that, yeah. So I apparently got that from here.
Huh. So the Motes got out somehow.
Yeah.
Shared their little puzzle game. Going back to the very beginning, one of the things that stuck with me was the oath that the naval officers took.
Okay. What was the oath? I don't remember that.
They don't actually give us, I don't think they give us the terms of the oath, or maybe they did. But the upshot is this: because humanity has been through these collapses and had to rebuild itself on more than one occasion, they now think it is so important that all of humanity be under one leadership that they are completely willing to sterilize entire worlds to make it happen. And our admiral, the commander of the Lenin, Admiral Kutuzov, actually had done that.
Yes.
He was known for this. And he turns out not to be that bad a guy. He is following his by God orders, and yes, Lenin will stay separate. And, yes, he will preserve the secrets he was told to preserve, but at the end, he turns out to, he's doing his job. He is doing his job very well, but it's not that he's unsympathetic to the other side. In fact, he breaks down, he allows the ambassadors on board Lenin, which was in direct violations of his orders.
Yes.
But this is a man who had bombarded an inhabited planet simply because they didn't want to be part of the new empire.
Yeah, he's interesting. He's one example, and there's a couple of characters that do this also, of people saying, well, this is the rule and we have to follow the rule. And then someone else goes, how can you be such a monster? It's like, I don't like the rule either, But this is my job, is to enforce this rule.
Well, and he doesn't even play that card, though. I mean, for most of the thing, he is simply an unmovable force, an unmovable object, rather. And it's not until very, very late in the, as they're preparing to flee and as they are in flight from the moat, that we get any glimpse behind the curtain.
Yes. Then I like that, actually. So it's not a card that he plays because, again, that's not part of his orders. His orders are to enforce the rule.
Yep.
But we do get, like, as you say, a peek behind the curtain, and that is who he is. He doesn't like to have to be that hard-nosed, but he knows the consequences, or he knows the potential consequences, and he's gonna follow his orders. Yeah, and people are accusing him of the worst things, and it's like, no, he's just doing his job, man.
Yep.
And for good reason. Yeah. If anyone else had been in that position, they would have lost both ships. Or the Empire, one of the two.
Just another one of the fun sci-fi things that I loved about this, right? So the Motes, the watchmakers are loose on MacArthur, and they accidentally or whatever, but they improve the Langston field, right? The energy absorbing field that protects the ships. They turn into an expanding sphere rather than just which I always felt like they played a little bit loose with the mechanics of how the field worked, but neither here nor there. Which means when they have to destroy MacArthur, they have a heck of a time doing it.
Yes,
because like, so much better, what a neat idea. But that same innovation, as I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, when they pop out of the crazy eddy point on the other side, they're actually inside a star, which is why they've done this in the past and no one's ever come back. It's like that expanding field is actually going to work against them. Did Niven and Pournelle catch this? Yes, actually, yes, they did. Right, so an expanding sphere that absorbs energy inside a star.
Bad.
Much worse than the non-expanding variety that the humans had.
One of the characters that I enjoyed, he had a significant part, and he's the sort of villain character who has the opposite of a heel turn, like midway through the book, which is Barry, the merchant.
Yes.
And he's so nefarious, and he's got like a Nedry moment from Jurassic Park where he steals the embryos. He saves a couple of these insidious watchmakers who destroy MacArthur. He saves a couple in cryonic suspension in one of his oxygen tanks.
Yep.
Which is also just great. It creates some great suspense. It never actually pays off. That he's risking his life to bring these things back to Earth, right? Yep. But then when the final thing happens and they take over the ship, it turns out that one of the fleeing astronauts is three watchmakers in a spacesuit. And he just has a nightmare reaction to it and destroys it and manages to kill them, and throws away his own things in the process. And thanks Allah for the rest of the book that he had that moment of clarity and did not bring these monsters to Earth.
And he spends the rest of the time that he shows up in the book lobbying actively against them.
Yes.
And he gets so impassioned about it, he becomes a lunatic almost, right?
Yes.
He gets dismissed. His concerns get dismissed in part because he is so terrified of these things that he can't stay calm and talk rationally about it. I love it. I love the fact that you've got such an impact on such a evil character. This is Jafar suddenly going, oh my God, what have I done?
Exactly. Right? Yeah. He all the way up until this point, he's someone who's always puts his own interest ahead of humanity's, and then he does a flip-flop.
Yep.
Yeah. He's like, no, humanity first. We have to save humanity.
Well, his life was on the line all of a sudden. I think that had a profound effect, clearly.
Yeah. That was a fun character for me. Here's a question for you. There are now apparently 4 or 5 sequels to this book. Have you read any of the sequels?
I know for a fact that I have read the second, and I believe I've read the third.
Interesting.
I don't really particularly have any strong memories about them, so I'm assuming that they were neither fantastic nor awful. I kind of, when I finished this, I kind of wanted to move into pick up the second one just to see where we ended up, but
I didn't even know you would take the story from here, because when we leave the end of this story, the Motes are blockaded. And I guess you can have a sort of a political novel about them reestablishing contact and lobbying to lift the blockade, or you could have humans going back down to the planet. And
I think that's what happens. I believe that there's a period of time, and it's not crazy long. I want to say it's like 25 years, and I might say this because I read the description of the book. That humanity has been sitting there at the Crazy Eddie point, and when the occasional Mote warship or exploration ship pops through, they accelerate its demise, its inevitable demise. But it's been a while since a ship has popped out, so they make the decision to
go investigate,
to go see what's
because
happening
they're near
in the
the
Mote.
end of a cycle. Yeah, so they want to. Interesting.
The Motes knew that the next collapse was imminent.
So here's a thing I had concerns about. Sort of empathetic concerns for the civilization in this book, is they made the decision not to wipe out the Motes because they figured out a way to do this blockade. But that seems like a very precarious situation to put yourself in, because we know the Mote civilization has been through cycles, but been around for at least 100,000 years.
Yep.
Humanity has not had nearly that long a track record and has suffered a collapse itself. So if humanity goes through a collapse of their civilization, the Motes will get out. Yeah.
Well, there's some safety there in that, at least pre-humanity, there was no reason to think the Motes ever would have gotten out, right? Because they had discovered the Alderson Drive. They didn't call it that.
Yeah.
But what they knew was that whenever they got around to building a ship and sending it through the point, it just never came back. So they just assumed it wasn't safe, correctly so.
Yeah.
But now they know it can be done.
Yes.
And they know it probably has something to do with that sneaky black field, which they now possess.
Yep.
Sooner or later, some crazy Eddie is going to put this together in the right permutation to get something out of there.
Yeah.
Or they're going to do what they did the first time.
Take the slow route. Yeah.
Take the slow route, Which there was a section in that bothered the bejesus out of me too.
What was that?
So they're looking at it, right? They've figured out, okay, this thing is traveling by light sail. Oh, look, we found these old church records about how the star was so much brighter than it was for like 120 years.
Yeah.
So for 120 years, they've got this unbelievably massive battery of laser cannon driving this light sail. Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about commitment. But then one of the navigator character who never really fit in with the rest of the crew, Renner, maybe? Anyway, he's looking at it. He goes, you know what's screwy, though, is they could have braked. They fired straight at the star. Mm-hmm. But he said if they had fired off to the side a little bit, they could have turned the laser off. They could have taken some time to rotate the device, and they could have used the laser for braking. And maybe I just don't know enough about sailing to see how this works. But if your source of propulsion is 20 light years straight behind you, in what possible way can you rotate your sail so that it catches light and does anything other than accelerate you?
I don't know, but I do know that I don't know enough about sailing. Like, for instance, I know that it's possible to sail upwind.
I know you can indeed sail into the wind.
And at first glance, it's like, how? The wind is the other side of you. It's pushing you in exactly the opposite direction.
But there's things with complex rigging and certain shaped. Well, okay.
And the keel is significant. Yeah. I don't know how you put a keel on a.
So I'm not sure that I buy that assertion.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's fine. It's self-correcting, because when they launched the Crazy Eddie probe, they knew that they were near the end of a cycle, and that it was unlikely that they would be able to keep that cannon in operation long enough for it to arrive.
Yeah.
So they probably planned to take the most direct route, because who knew if things at ground control would still be operating the decades later that they arrived.
Yeah, I don't know. I give them the benefit of the doubt, because I know Niven takes the science very seriously, and Pournelle takes the nautical stuff very seriously. So this whole Navy is based on a nautical Navy, the whole structure of it. So, yeah.
So we'll assume they know what they're talking about there, but it's still, it stretches my little brain.
In fact, Niven famously, when he wrote Ringworld, and he did a lot of research to get the math right on that, and then somebody pointed out to him that he made some errors, and he fixed them in a subsequent edition of the book.
Hey!
Yeah, he thanked the reader and said, "You're right, I didn't consider these things." And he made changes, yeah.
What's his name that wrote The Martian?
Andy Weir.
Yeah, he subsequently released the Martian Engineer's Notebook, and he actually addresses errors that he made. I tried to read the notebook. Wow, is it all math? I mean, this is for physicists and scientists and engineers. It's not a casual read.
Yeah, I think The Martian is pretty heavy in that direction to begin with. So at least it's got a narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah. I said some negative things about this book, but I did enjoy reading it a lot. And this is a book I remember quite fondly. And I don't think I've read it. I think I read it in high school and then read it again once sometime later, maybe 10 years after that. But I haven't looked at it in 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, it's been a long...
And it's still a fun read.
Yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed the first 2/3, 3/4 of it.
Yeah.
I was actually talking on the phone with a buddy of mine. Shout out to JD. Thanks, bro. And he was talking about, he had been thinking about rereading the book. It's like, I have been looking for a Niven book, another Niven book to do on this show. That's the one I'm going to pick. So, yeah, there we go. Our first request.
Have you read The Legacy of, I don't even know how to say this, Herat? H-E-R?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I definitely remember the name.
Okay.
At the moment, that's all I'm remembering about it.
Oh, really? Okay, because it has a lot of parallels to this book. It has an alien with a terrible secret, which has something in common with the Motes. So I won't spoil it for you if you want to go back and read it.
I'll have to dig out and see.
And I believe that's Niven and Pournelle and Barnes. Yeah.
That's probably where I came across it recently.
Yeah.
Niven and Pournelle worked together a lot. They got a nice inventory of books that they co-authored.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think the books, and it's interesting, the books that they write together are significantly different from the books either of them write alone.
Yeah, definitely. So the next Niven I pick will probably have to be Ringworld, because I've clearly been ignoring that for too long. But we got a year to worry about that.
What about Integral Trees? Have you read Integral Trees?
Bother. So many books.
I mean, Ringworld's great and it's a classic, but just as a tale, I like Integral Trees better.
All right. So final thoughts?
Final thoughts. That's it. This was really fun to revisit. What a classic of science fiction and a solid read. And I wouldn't have minded if it was shorter, but I didn't mind reading the rest of it. So yeah.
Yeah, same for me. I really, really enjoyed the read. The writing just flew by. I think it was a fantastic blend of a compelling story with some nice, hard-ish sci-fi thrown in there to keep my geek happy, geek happy. All right. Well, what's coming up next?
Coming up next, we have I want to say fantasy novel, but technically it's set in a science fictional universe, which it's alluded to in the very first book. But it's the first in a fantasy series by Stephen Brust, and it is called Jerrig.
All right. This will be a first read for me.
All right. See you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.